Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Good Karma Success Coach podcast. I'm your host, Melinda Van Fleet, and today is a solo episode. I actually love listening to solo podcast hosts. I love it. So I hope that you enjoy this podcast. I was thinking a lot about what to talk about this morning that would best serve the most people, and I did my morning walk in silence so I could see what would come through. And first, it was a podcast about niching, because I definitely have a lot of things that can help a lot of people on the whole concept of niching, and I think the paradigm out there is really shifting, and it's been a mental struggle for me over the past couple years. But then it shifted to sharing some thoughts about competition. And I recorded a podcast earlier this week on competition. It was my fifth and final podcast for the Brilliant Breakthroughs for the Small Business Owner book series that my husband and I were part of last fall. And when we signed up to be part of that book series, it's a co-authored book series, there was in the agreement to do 5 podcast interviews with Maggie. So I had my 5th one this past weekend. It was kind of amazing. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm done with this part of the journey. And we ended up talking about competition. Competition is such an amazing topic. I think that a lot of people just are talking about it as at the surface level, especially if you're on social media and what's going on out there. But there is so much wrapped up in it and so many layers. If you're a Gen Xer like my husband and I, you likely grew up with parents that were extremely competitive. And when I was on my walk, I was having this flashback memory of when I was in the 7th grade and was playing basketball against this girl. She's very blonde, and we were guarding each other. And I could smell her hairspray. Now, this was, I'm a child of the 80s. We had the big hair, right? The Aquanet, all the memes. Yeah, they're true. And she really smelled. Her hairspray really smelled. I don't know what brand she used, but it just really smelled. So I remember telling my dad after the game that I had a hard time guarding her because of her hairspray and the smell. And my dad, he was like, that's strategy. She did that on purpose so you wouldn't guard her so closely. That's great competition. You need to do that. When I was a kid, we ate onions. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm in 7th grade. Like, really, it's 7th grade. And it's hairspray, Dad, hairspray. So, when you grow up like that, and my dad is still really competitive, like really competitive. And my mother is extremely judgmental. So imagine the firestorm of having a father who's extremely competitive and a mother who's extremely judgmental, like what that did to my brain as a kid and how much unwiring I have had to do as an adult. I even wrote about a competitive story in Confidence Mastery for Couples of when I was in my 20s and someone I was extremely competitive against. And, I'll probably chop up that book and make some blog posts with it because that's a good story. And, we all have different things that we have to work on in our lives and do a lot of mindset shifting around it. And here's why that's important. Because it affects your energy. If you're worrying about someone else and focused on someone else, that's affecting your energy and your focus. The people that are most successful are the people that are competitive with themselves. Like every day, they wish to get a bit better in whatever they're working towards. But we forget about that sometimes. We forget about that when we're on social media and we're like, oh my gosh, she's ahead of me and this and that. And she did this and she has better pictures, or, oh, she's lost more weight, or she has more clients, or she just, is sharing that she had this big month or whatever. The work is in shifting that to celebrating and really recognizing that they're just ahead of you. That was a huge, huge shift for me years ago. The first spiritual teacher that's like an online space spiritual teacher that I started following, and I've mentioned this before, is Gabby Bernstein. I used to follow Gabby, and she's amazing. And I remember having like envy, competitive thoughts towards Gabby Bernstein. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so not at the level of Gabby Bernstein, right? So how goofy is that? Like, why would that even pop up? But that's just the wiring from, childhood, from society, from all those things. And then I remember talking with a friend of mine who we were both into, learning from different spiritual teachers and reading books, and we were sharing information. And I said something about Gabby Bernstein, like, about her latest book. And my friend was like, who's Gabby Bernstein? And I was like, what? Like, how do you not know who Gabby Bernstein is? She was like, yeah, I never heard of her. I'm like, no clue. And it started to dawn on me that the world is so big. So here's someone that I considered like at my level, a friend, sharing like information. She didn't know who Gabby Bernstein was. And I have come across people who don't know who Tony Robbins is. What? That's mind blowing. Think about it. So why do we get so caught up in comparison and competition against other people? When really those other people are just ahead of you in their inspiration, and use that as fuel to move yourself forward. Because if they can do it, you can do it too. We're all, humans, right? We're all people. Does that mean you're going to accomplish what they accomplished in their lifetime? Who knows, right? That's the journey. And there's so many factors involved in that, including where your soul is. And that's something I write about in my new book, Life and Love Lessons. And that was something I had to realize too. Like my soul in my journey is just different than other people. And that's okay. You know why that's okay? Because I'm pretty fucking lucky. I have an amazing life. I'm really blessed. So even though I have desires and goals and things that aren't achieved yet, where I am right now, I'm like really good. I'm solid. So I challenge you as you're worrying about someone else and comparing yourself, like think about all the things that you are grateful for and be solid in that. Be solid in that. Another thing I would say to Ryan years ago when we started in this space of sport fishing, which is, I believe, the most competitive thing that you can possibly be involved in, because there are so many factors with sport fishing. It's insane. I truly would ask, if you're out there listening and you can tell me that what you're involved in is more competitive than sport fishing, please email me. I would love to hear, honestly. I would love to hear, because I honestly don't think there's anything that's more challenging than running a charter business, or being a sport fisherman. It's insane. Because even if you're a basketball player, you don't have to deal with the fucking weather. Like weather is insane. Bait is insane. All these things that you can't control. So when Ryan and I first started, and we've had so many conversations about competition, oh my gosh, it just goes on and on and on. And he's come light years, and I'm so proud of him. One of the things I would say was, do you want to be that other person? Do you want their children? Do you want their boat expense? Do you want the fact that they probably have other owners in the boat, the cost of the boat? Like a Freeman, for example, a lot of people have Freemans. Those are $500,000. majority of a lot of guides have like a backer with that, right? So then that backer owns you. Like we don't have that. We own everything ourselves. We are self-made. And do you want that? Like, and there's nothing wrong if someone has that. That's not my point. But do you want that, right? Do you want to be at a big marina with all these other captains? Do you want that? Do you want to live in their house? Do you want their house? Really? Like, do you want their wife? That's another thing. Like break it down. Break it down. Break it down. And I can tell you that majority of those things you're going to probably say, yeah, no, I really don't. I don't want their 5 kids. No, I don't want a boat payment like that or someone owning me. Like, no, I don't want to be at a big marina where there's tons of competition and your audience comes and goes and you're not really building the same relationships that I've been building for years with my community and my clients, or maybe that does work for you, right? Everyone's different. That's my point. Everyone's different. So really recognizing what you want, you desire, and what you're happy with, you can start to let go of like worrying about what the fuck everyone else is doing. Like, who cares? Like, literally, who cares? I have a chapter in Confidence Mastery for couples called Who Cares? Like, really, who cares? Just worry about yourself. Because your energy and your focus is going to go where you direct it, right? So why would you direct it in a bad place? Direct it in a good place. Direct it in a good place. And directing it towards your growth in your future is the good place. That's the good place. Not spending extra energy and mind space worrying about someone else. It's just stupid. So I shared a quote in my podcast with Maggie that I mentioned earlier, that podcast that I recorded last week, that flowers don't think about the flower next to them as they bloom. They just bloom. And it's just so true. They just bloom. They just bloom. We're all on our own journey. And just bloom. One last story I thought I'd share that popped up this past week that was really interesting too, is reframing something that you may initially think is competition. So this goes back to my story about growing up with my parents. You become wired to think that everyone's out to get you sometimes, right? That they may be trying to compete against you. Well, not always true and likely not true. So it kind of makes me laugh as I go on in this lifetime. People are busy. They might not even be paying any attention to you, right? So someone told me last week that they're like, oh, this person's competing against me. And I was like, oh, okay, what's going on? And they said that, well, they DM'd me some pictures that are similar to what I do. And I'm like, well, what? Like what? Well, this person is so used to thinking about competition because they're wired, right? That's my point, is that they're wired from childhood. So working on the rewiring, that they thought it was being competitive. I didn't see it that way at all. I was like, no, that person just wants to, I don't know, share with you, wants you to celebrate them, say congratulations. They likely learned that from you because this person is also a coach. So they likely learned that from you and they want to share. Oh, I didn't think of it that way. Oh, I get it. Yeah, you're probably right. So just taking an extra moment to reframe and shift your mindset, which then shifts the whole energetics of it, right? You shift it from being, oh my God, this person's trying to copy me or competitive with me, to like, no, they probably admire you. They're just wanting to share. People like to share and they like to get a pat on the back, and that builds momentum and celebration. It's actually a really cool thing. And it's something I've recently realized too a lot on social media is, comment on other people's posts. comment and say, congratulations, that's awesome. And like do it, even if you don't start out in the greatest intention, let's put it that way. Like you can train yourself to get there and you'll start to feel better. It's amazing. So like the energy will start to shift around all of that. And you'll be like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I feel better about social media. I feel better about, competition and not having a lack mindset. The world is abundant. Like all these things kind of start to naturally shift as you go through the process, right? And it doesn't happen overnight, people. So always remember that. Like none of this happens overnight. And unfortunately, that's not being shared enough. But over the course of a couple months, you will definitely see a shift, right? So this person who thought someone was trying to copy them in their DMs, now they'll have that little shift. So next time it happens, they still might have a trigger, right? They still might trigger it, but they'll remember that, oh, no, let's shift it, right? So then let's say by the third time, then that can shift and be like gone. And you're like, oh, gone, worked through that trigger. No more negative energy around that. I've worked through that trigger. And that is the work. That is the work. And it doesn't happen overnight, but you have to work on it and you can do it. I know you can do it. We can all do it. We all have these things that we've worked on throughout the years, and everyone's stories are different. Everyone's stories, some are bigger than others. Some have more things to work on than others. There's so much that goes into that, but definitely know you're not alone and it is possible to work through these things. You just have to remember to do it. Remember, and take the action. So that's all I've got today because I actually think I could probably talk forever on this topic. And this actually gave me an idea for a book. So that's my brain. So I will just let it go here. And maybe this will be a part 2. And I'll just take some notes for the future if my brain keeps going. So thank you so much for listening. Please connect. If you're interested in private one-on-one coaching, just send me a message, an email, whatever. You can Google my name. It's all over the board. Till next time, be grateful, be curious, always be learning, and you know what? Have some fun too. Thanks again for listening.